Now, the third trend that we're going to explore when it comes to Asian American contemporary families is the so-called transnational family. Asian American families as, quote, transnational families. Now, first of all, I have to say this. The majority of Asian American families in the U.S. Are not transnational families, okay? But a significant fraction of Asian American families you could definitely qualify as transnational. Now, you have to think about the term here to help us understand what this refers to. Transnational, that term means going beyond the nation, right? You transcend the nation to the point where, you don't seem to recognize these boundaries. You have back and forth migration. So this is the image we have to keep in mind. We also have to keep in mind the transnational economy, and you could, translate that to a global economy, right? Global or transnational. And this is, as we discussed, when the U.S. economy restructures, we are no longer industrial. Rather, the industry goes abroad to other countries, and our economy transitions into a service economy like it is today. And the labor that's characteristic of a service economy is obviously different from an industrial economy. Here, you're working in a service capacity. And as a result, we still need forward labor because it's cheap labor, but you have different types of laborers coming in. Certainly, you have still some unskilled laborers, but you certainly have this significant influx of professional um, laborers. Okay, we talked about H-1B workers. We talked about doctors and nurses in the healthcare industry, engineers, and so forth. Okay, these are the new professionals that are coming in. In this case, we're talking about Asians here, coming from the continent of Asia. Okay, so let's get back to the definition of transnational family here and think about the context that I just described here. A transnational family is when the immigrant's nuclear family, okay, nuclear being defined as, the father slash husband, and then you have the mother slash wife, and then you have the children, right? They're all living together in one household. But a transnational family happens when that nuclear family is actually splintered as a result of the labor needs of economic globalization. What does that mean? It means that one parent is a transnational laborer working in a different country. Okay. Or it could be the case where the children are being sent abroad, not necessarily for economic reasons, but for educational reasons. But we discussed this, how education, you could say, is part of, you know, um, professional life because it's a means towards an end. So it could be the case where children are sent abroad to be educated, in this case, in the United States. So it leads to some children attending universities in the United States, but their parents are still found. They could be going back and forth, let's say, from, let's say, Irvine to China or Taiwan or India. But, it's this interesting, unstable relation, right, that's happening. Okay, so this is what's happening when you have the transnational family. It's splintered by economic globalization. They're not all living under the same roof. Okay, so just look at the slide here. You have this international division of labor where Asian immigrants enter the service economy as professionals or laborers. They leave them behind. Now, what happens here is the sending of remittances back home if they are part of this international division of labor, right? For example, if an engineer or nurse comes to the United States, but they leave their family behind in the Philippines or India, well, they're going to send money back to them. And that's called remittances. REMITTANCE. So remittances sent back are very important to that home country's economy. In the Philippines, it constitutes 10% of the gross domestic product. Okay, so that's so significant. And in fact, the Philippine government therefore encourages overseas workers, right? Now, another thing is that when it comes to letter A here, division of labor on an international scale, you see that this transnational labor is often gendered. You know, the men, they tend to enter entry level white collar jobs or even manual labor like construction. Women, they typically migrate as domestic workers, caregivers, nurses, right? These are the typical jobs that are determined by gender, right, in their home country. Now, we have to remember that it's still cheap labor. Even if you're an engineer or a nurse, you're paid less than the American worker, right? But it is high compared to the standards of their home country. Okay, so that's largely incentive. Another issue here is, it's a splintered family. So you have a lot of parental guilt for these workers who go abroad to work, leaving their children behind. And when they studied Filipino domestic workers, for example, work in the United States or Italy or other areas, it leads to a high likelihood of psychological problems because of the guilt. Okay, and here in the Philippines, for example, there's a lot of their culture today. It talks about parents going abroad, children being neglected, and the consequences of that psychologically, morally, and so forth. Economically, the consequences are good, but then there's still destructive elements in the process of that, right? Now, on the other hand, you could have letter B here, right? And this really applies to wealthier professionals in that, transnational economy. For example, Chinese, or Taiwanese or Korean businessmen. So what they do is, they are often traveling country to country for business. And in this arrangement, their children usually live abroad as students. Okay, these parents believe that this is the best way to ensure their professional and economic success as children. So what they do is they send these kids to the top universities, and since we're talking about Asian Americans, they go to like UCs, right, or Stanford or what have you, and they call these kids quote parachute kids. Okay, why are they called that? Because they dropped them off, as if on a parachute, right, to drop them off at these universities, and it leads to some cultural dissonance, I should say, right. For some of these children, they typically enjoy their expanded freedom. They engage in the consumerism of the United States, and they enjoy this, right? They start buying Lamborghinis and clubbing and all this stuff along with their peers. It's not like that doesn't exist in their home country, but there's still more parental authority in their home country that they have to deal with typically, right? But here you have expanded freedom, so it leads to some cultural dissonance.